Wow, it feels like forever since I've actually sat down and done a face-to-face video talking with you all, but I'm finally back to doing some more of these now and then. Today I want to discuss a material that's been on my mind a lot lately, and that is one that is called oilskin. In contemporary times, we have a lot of solutions to weather-resistant and waterproof materials, from PVC to Gore-Tex, and even natural-based fibers like rubber. But when it comes to historical sewing and materials that are more adequate for historical practice, that's where people often hit a wall and don't exactly know what to use. Leather and wool can protect a person up until a certain point, but there comes a time where eventually that wool gets soaked through in a heavy downpour, and then you become very, very, very cold and very wet. So that's where the fabric oilskin comes in. Oilskin is also sometimes referred to as oilcloth, and so for the purpose of this video, in order to reduce redundancy, I'm going to be using the two interchangeably. Perhaps you've heard of this material, and perhaps it just sounds bizarre. Is it oily skin, or oil made of skin, or skin made of oil? It is none of the above. It's actually quite a phenomenal material that I've been working with a lot lately, and typically it has some type of cloth base. Most of the time this is cotton, but I have seen instances where wool is actually used as the base for oilskin. The cloth base is then oiled or waxed with some type of material in order to make it weather resistant, because oil and water definitely do not mix. Historically, it was often coated with boiled linseed oil and then mineral spirits in order to reduce the grease. I've also heard of it being mixed with some sort of tar and paint, but in modern times, oilcloth tends to be made with things like beeswax, or in a lot of instances as well, petroleum-based oils. The materials used to create the weather-resistant coating really does depend just upon manufacturer to manufacturer, and all of them seem to have their own methods of making this fabric weather-resistant. If you've ever seen those zero-waste alternatives to cling film, this kind of reminds me of that, because usually that's just a cloth that's then coated with beeswax. You can actually make your own really easily, and it saves you a lot of money, which is totally aside from anything historical related. But that is in essence the exact same premise as oilskin, because it's just a cloth base that is then protected with a special wax coating. And again, it causes it to become water resistant. You can actually thank sailors for the development of oilskin. It's been quite difficult for me to find primary sources on the history and origins of oilcloth, so for that reason, a lot of the information I'm going to be sharing I got through various secondary sources. I still do think it's fairly accurate though, because I did use a pretty good secondary source, but I'm also not a fashion historian or an expert at this, so take everything with a bit of a pinch of salt. And since we're talking about sailors, no pun intended. The origins of oilskin seem to date back to the 15th and 16th centuries, where sailors would actually use their old sails from their ships to fashion various weather-resistant capes out of them. Sails at this time used to be coated with a mix of linseed oil and some type of tar or paint in order to not only make them weather-resistant, but also to reduce the weight of the actual sail, because it won't be absorbing water, therefore making it much lighter. By the late 19th century, the manual oiling of sailcloth became an industrialized practice in Scotland, and in 1898, Edward Leroy, a New Zealander, actually mastered this process and created a very specialized, breathable, yet weather-resistant material for sailors to use when they're up on their decks. Today, oilskin is actually categorized as foul weather gear, and somehow that term just makes me giggle. I don't know why, there's something about it that just feels funny. And this foul weather gear is utilized by all sorts of individuals and in a variety of industries. I would say at this point oilskin is pretty widespread, and it tends to be created into a lot more sort of trendier garments that you see coming out and in throughout fashion. My most recent experience with oilcloth is actually that I sewed a Victorian cloak made out of oilskin, and I used the exact same pattern that I did for the winter wool cloak that I made a couple months ago. I just slightly modified the pattern to make it better for this specific use. A seller on eBay actually had a bunch of dead stock oilskin from an old factory that closed down, and they were selling it for £5 a meter, so I obviously couldn't resist that opportunity, and I really needed something that would help protect me against the rain and all the upcoming spring weather that's ahead of us. And especially if I want to wear silk gowns out, I really want to be able to protect these with more of an outer shell material that would help resist the water. This was especially a practical option in my head for those days where it's super windy and it's just too windy that you can't even really carry an umbrella. So now that I've told you a little bit about the historical origin of oilskin, along with my own experience of using the material and what I've made out of it, I'd like to list for you some of the pros and cons of this type of fabric, so that way you can decide whether or not it might be suitable for one of your next projects. The very first pro is that it is obviously a weather-resistant material. I won't go so far as to say that I think the material is weatherproof or waterproof, because I think that's a pretty bold claim and one that would require quite a bit of testing in order to validate. But basically, you can wear this material in very heavy rain and you'll still most likely stay dry. So I feel like that really does help to back up the claim of its weather-resistant properties. Next, because the material is coated in waxes and oils, you don't actually have to generally wash it or iron it before you use it for sewing. It is sort of the bane of any sewist, dressmaker, tailor's existence to have to prep fabric right before you actually use it, and you just get really excited and you want to be able to sew with your material and all this stuff, but then you have to go and wash it all and dry it all and iron and press, and it becomes this massive ordeal that we all have to go through. We sort of all just grit our teeth and get through the first stages of the sewing process, so that way we can move on to the actual fun stuff. Well, with oilskin, you don't actually have to do this, because obviously you can't really wash it above a certain temperature, and even then with certain manufacturing practices, it's best to just leave the material alone and use it right away. The water sort of just trickles off of the fabric, which is perfect if you're coming in from a rainstorm, because you can just shake your cloak or whatever you make out of the oilskin before you come in through your door, and then your material is basically good just to be able to air dry. The other thing with oilskin is that it is a reasonably affordable material. Because you're going to be using it for outer shell type garments or outer garments in general, you really won't need more than probably 3 meters of the material, even if you're going to be, say, cartridge pleating a cloak. And then if you search for things like dead stock options or maybe even offcuts, it makes it even more cost efficient. And finally, oilskin is very easy to spot clean. You basically just get a damp towel and wipe, and that's all you need to do. For deeper cleaning, that is a little bit of a different story, and that really does depend from manufacturer of fabric to other manufacturer, because everybody's going to have a slightly different set of care instructions for their oilcloth. But for everyday use and wear, when you just get maybe a little bit of mud or dirt on it, you can easily wipe that right off, and you don't have to worry about soaking it or getting a stain out or anything like that. So now the cons. What is challenging about oilskin? With some types of oilcloth, you'll actually have to re-wax or re-oil the material with prolonged use, but really this doesn't differ that much from the general upkeep of most garments. If you own a pair of leather shoes, you're probably very well aware of the general upkeep that goes into taking care of those, from shining and oiling and waxing to all the other practices. Well, it's really no different for oilskin at the end of the day. And in certain instances with some manufacturers I was reading about, not all oilcloth does need to be re-oiled or re-waxed at some point. I think this is just with specific types. At the end of the day, just check out the instructions for what your specific type of oilskin says and recommends, and just follow those and I'm sure you'll be safe. Hand sewing with oilskin is also pretty challenging, and this is something I found quite difficult. Over time, when you're hand sewing, your hands and the needle actually get a little bit greasy, and that reduces the friction and your ability to actually have a grip on the needle. There are a few ways to mitigate this. The first one being, maybe don't choose to hand sew your oilskin and use a machine instead, unless you absolutely want to give your hands a challenge, like I did for some reason. But as anybody that watches this channel knows, I literally hand sew everything I make for myself, so because of that, I don't own an electric machine, and it didn't really dawn on me that it would be difficult to potentially sew through oilskin by hand. But if people did it historically once in the past, you know, I guess it's still technically possible today. It's just a little bit faffy and frustrating at times. If you do choose to hand sew, definitely use a thimble because I think that really saved my life. And a leather thimble is perhaps even better because it helps to create another level of grip. Finally, I kept a little bit of alcohol-based spray near me at all times. That way, when my hands started to feel like they were getting too greasy, I could just spray the alcohol and that would cut through the grease and I would have friction again on my needle. And lastly, even though I mentioned it was a pro that you don't have to iron your oilskin fabric, this can also be a con because if you do iron it, it can actually melt the wax or the oil, which can be very, very messy and a little bit disastrous. With certain types of oilskin, you can cool iron it and you can also finger press it, so not all is lost, basically. You can still get a good crease out of the oilskin, but because of this, if there are already pre-existing wrinkles, it can be a little bit frustrating. So it's just a matter of getting used to things and entering into this world where somehow using an iron will do more harm than it does good. So that's everything I can think of about oilskin and what I wanted to say regarding the material. I would say that for me personally, the material was very well worth it because it offers a natural fiber solution to a weather-resistant material, and that isn't always readily available, especially not in terms of historical adequateness. In a way, oilskin has really changed my mindset surrounding outerwear now in historical practice, and it's just given me so many more opportunities now to make outerwear garments that I know are actually going to be able to protect my other layers. Especially in places like the UK, it's very difficult to avoid thinking about how your clothing is going to react in rain and in other different weather conditions. So being able to have this solution, which also keeps you not only dry but also warm, feels very well worth not only the effort I had to put into sewing the material, but also in regards to the price. Please let me know in the comments down below if oilskin has piqued your interest, and if it has, what are the things that you're interested in making out of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks for another video.